All right. We are live and everyone can see us. Except Queen,
Nice.
because Queen. All right. Welcome, one and all, to the Minds of the Ecclesia panel. I am your host, Lethe Water Kai. And with me today, I have some amazing guests to talk about some amazing topics. So I'm going to go ahead and let everybody get an intro, starting with Fairy Queen.
Hi everybody, my name is Fairy Queen. You can find me at It's Me Fairy Queen and at It Me Fairy Queen on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. Please go ahead and check me out there. Thank you so much. Lethe, do you want us to start with an intro for one of the topics, or do you want us to wait until everybody's?
We'll just get intros first. You'll get first dibs on the topic, and I'll read the topic before we go through it.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Cool. And with us, Kat, how you doing?
Hello, I'm Katya. On Twitter, I'm just Premier Katya. I don't have Twitch or YouTube or anything else right now. Just kind of vibing on Discord. So, yeah, I've been on Wix panels and stuff before. So hey.
Awesome, glad to have you. And with us, Hammer with his excellent plushie collection.
Yep. Hey, I'm Mr. Hammer. You can find me on twitch.tv/m_r_hammer. I mostly play Marvel Snap, but I also talk about politics whenever people want me to do that.
And let me DM DQ real quick. But she is all muted up. Give her a hot second. And then I'll start reading off the prompt. Okay, well, she can get one later. So in hindsight, depending on the media, should we still be able to appreciate certain media based on the author? Going off of this current thing where Neil Gaiman's screen adaptations have been halted after allegations of sexual misconduct. Netflix Dead Boy Detectives has been canceled and productions by Amazon and Disney have been put on hold amid reports about the Coraline author. 3 screen adaptations of Neil Gaiman's work have been canceled or had their production paused amid reports accusing the author of Coraline and the Sandman of sexual misconduct. Netflix Dead Boy Detectives, based on characters created for DC Comics by Gaiman and Matt Wagner, have been canceled after 1 season. Production of a 3rd and final season of Amazon drama Good Omens, based on the 1990 novel by Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, has been paused. Meanwhile, development of a film adaptation of Gaiman's 2008 young adult novel The Graveyard Book has been put on hold. None of the streaming services has confirmed that these decisions were taken because of the allegations, but Gaiman apparently offered to step back from his involvement in Good Omens, according to a Deadline. Gaiman's representatives declined to comment on the decisions taken by the streaming services, and we pretty much know how this goes. So there are certain things like The Cosby Show where, looking back in hindsight based on the allegations and then seeing the media and seeing certain things that mirror what this person was accused of in those works, can be off-putting for a lot of people. Can we truly separate ourselves from the author or from the artist when viewing these works? And I'll start with Fairy Queen.
Sure. So I think it's a yes and a no from me. And to explain what I mean, I think that there's a difference between refusing to engage or refusing to read somebody's work or refusing to consume somebody's art as opposed to financially supporting that art or financially supporting that artwork, that book, or financially supporting that movie. So, for instance, like I think that, so for instance, in a classroom, for instance, if for like it's often the case, like many authors that you have to read like in class are often horrific people. So Thomas Jefferson, he was a slave owner and a rapist, but you have to read him, right? It's important for you to read him if you're in a history class. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was a horrific human being. Lord Byron, was a pedophile and committed incest with somebody, I believe, who was his half sister. Like, there are so many evil people that you have to read, that it's if you picked up every single evil person on the bookshelf and you tossed them into the garbage, there would be barely anything left on the shelf left to read. So in that regard, I think that it's perfectly acceptable, and you shouldn't avoid reading or consuming or watching the art just because the author was an evil person. However, I think that is distinct from from boycotting. I think that it's distinct from like financially supporting it. So just because, for instance, I might be willing to read a copy of a book from Neil Gaiman, for instance, that doesn't mean that I'm going to go out of my way to buy a copy. I'm going to find like a free copy or a used copy because I don't want to put my dollars, I don't want to pay money that goes back all the way to the pockets of Neil Gaiman, right? So I think that's the best of both worlds, because you can still hold artists accountable for bad behavior, like when they do something wrong, without necessarily tossing every piece of artwork that we can appreciate in the garbage.
Awesome. Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, so I feel pretty similar to Fairy Queen, but I'm going to kind of piggyback on that and elaborate by saying that a lot of people feel like, oh, because somebody did something bad, it's not moral even to look at it or to engage with the media without obviously the money part. And I think a lot of people, when they say that, it's basically like a disgust reaction, which I totally understand. And people don't look at that objectively. Like, I mean, when you look at things historically, I tend to agree with Fairy Queen. There's a lot of pieces of shit in the past who did some horrible things that we still engage with their media and the things that they wrote and all that stuff. But, I mean, I totally understand when there's situations where a person personally cannot separate them. Like, for example, I can never listen to the band Lost Prophets again after hearing what their lead singer did. It is disgusting, like literally made me sick. Like, it is the worst. And I'm like, okay, like, keep that far away from me. But I'm not going to say if you do without supporting this situation, it's kind of whatever. The only thing that I'll say is if there's like a piece of media where like, hey, the person was really, plugging in their bad deeds into it, like kind of like a Dan Schneider situation, that's kind of a different story, because it's like, it's really intertwined with the media, like with his like feet obsession, for example. But yeah.
All right. Appreciate that. Hammer.
Yeah, not to rock the boat, but I pretty much agree with what has been said already. I think that media is a conversation. Engaging with media is a conversation between you and the content, not a conversation between you and the author. So, so you can kind of like enjoy it in a vacuum. And I think a great example. I haven't read a lot of Neil Gaiman, but I feel as though his acts don't really reflect what his like what he writes. So I think he used his like power as someone with money to coerce people into sex, but you don't really see that in his content. At least I don't think you do. So you really don't have to worry about that. And if you are worried about their terrible acts and their terrible personality seeping into their content, like you said, well, I think all you need is good media analysis. So you can take what the actual meaning of a piece of art is, but and interpret it yourself. You don't have to be like, oh, is it secretly influencing me in a certain way? And I think another like counter example is like probably J.K. Rowling when she talks about like certain races of people being like this, her slavery examples in her books where slavery is actually totally cool and you're super into it, right? Knowing now that she's kind of partial to those kind of beliefs where she's aligned herself with like very right wing political figures. I think you can take a different meaning, or like say there's like a musical artist who talks about like fucking bitches like crazy and doing all these things, and you're like, oh, it's just fun. We're all just having fun. And then if he gets a allegation against him, well, now you know it's not fun. Now you know that the entire time he was trying to convince you that that thing was okay all along.
All right. Well, Queen will hopefully be joining us soon, but definitely with Neil Gaiman, and I have read a lot of his work, you are going to see some of the allegations come to light. Well, large similarities in his work. So that's something I can definitely say is a reality. So by all means, let's have a discussion.
In what way
Um,
is that? I haven't read a lot of his stuff.
I was
There's
going to ask the
sexual
same
assault.
thing.
There is sexual assault, pretty vivid sexual assault in some of his works.
Gotcha.
Definitely not all of it, but it comes up.
So,
Okay, so is Lethe the only one who's read Neil Gaiman here? Does anyone else a professional? Because I don't really want to like bring the moderator in, but
Didn't he write Coraline? Am I wrong for mistaken for thinking that he did? Yeah, he did. He wrote Coraline. So I've taught Coraline in a class. So, but I think that that's the only book of his that I'm aware of that I think I've read.
yeah, that's probably not the example that Lethe is trying to get into. Lethe, do you
Hmm.
want to like? Because I know you're saying, oh, there are like instances where it's like you're kind of alluding to it, but like, can we get into like specifics?
yeah.
So let me see. He did a lot of work for Sandman and things like that. So you're going to get some of that in those works. Let me see. Because his work goes pretty far.
Hmm.
Let's get into the novels. So specifically, it was well, in American Gods, you have some of these situations coming up where people are assaulted and murdered. You have where was it? Wolves on the Walls was another instance in which you can see some pretty vivid depictions going on. What else
Do
was
any
there?
of them have like direct like connections to the allegations about specific things that are involved? Or I'm
No, the best I could say is for the most part, the work would have been almost exactly the same without that depiction in it. And I think that's mostly what I would say is like these scenes could have been left out and the work wouldn't have changed in any horrible way. Like it still would have been very viable work.
gotcha.
Okay, I can feel this might like swing into a conversation whether or not depicting that in art is like okay in general is like which I'm willing to talk about. Is anyone else like
Um,
opposed to like talking about that?
I'm
No.
definitely willing to
What's
talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely.
Okay, so I guess that would be my question is if let's use Goblin Slayer as an example. That's one of the more like intense examples, right? Are you guys familiar with that?
No.
Sorta.
So at the beginning
Okay.
of Goblin
Okay.
Slayer, there's some pretty vivid scenes of assault going on just to kind of set the tone for the world that you're dealing with. So I would say it kind of is important to have a scene like that in there to give you an idea of the stakes at
Mhm.
hand. Whereas if you left that out, you wouldn't really feel
And
stakes on the same level.
and another thing about that is that and I'm not because I'm not we can talk about it, but in Goblin Slayer, and I was gonna give other examples like Game of Thrones is probably more well known. The sexual violence is depicted as like something that is performed by evil characters, like it is something to be condemned, right? Like so does that if it is shown as something that is evil, does that make it okay?
I generally am like a person who is for more free expression in art. I really like don't care either way. I think as long as, people can use media literacy and things that have adult content aren't, like put around children or encouraged to be consumed by children who might not be able to make the distinction between fantasy and reality. It's not something that bothers me because I'm more concerned about free expression in art.
Hold on. I mean, imagine like I'm assuming everyone here we're all against revenge porn, right? We're all against, the idea like after, like
Sure.
if partners break up, their nudes being distributed, right?
Sure.
Why is that bad?
Obviously.
It's bad because private information about you that was
Right.
supposed to just go to this one person has now been exposed to everyone else, right? So
Right.
even
Right, without your
if
consent.
well, but like, so it translates over to the book thing because like if there are very extremely detailed, vivid sex scenes like within these works of fiction, okay, that are transparently like actually an experience that Neil Gaiman like went through, and it's obvious to people, and to the point like where it exposes like private information about that person, then like it's not as bad as like actually distributing somebody's nudes, but it's still pretty bad, right? Like, I mean, you're openly
Sure.
talking about people's private information and then using the fact that it's fiction as a way to basically, cover up the fact that after the matter, that's not okay. So I guess like, from that
I don't know if that's
perspective,
happening.
that would be a reason not to read the books specifically that have the scenes of sexual assault, because it's kind of like you accessing like somebody's like nudes on the internet, after they were exposed or leaked, by an angry ex, like that's kind of how it feels in a way, right?
How do you know that it mirrors a situation that happened in real, unless obviously somebody's like, here's my allegation, and it like mirrors an exact thing that happened or something similar that happened. But if it's completely different, I mean, like, I don't think that there's that connection that can be really drawn there unless it's, you can really prove it. Go ahead.
Sorry, can I add on to that? Is that like I think there's a decent argument that that the depictions in these Neil Gaiman books are like kind of in a way unrelated to the allegations, because if you look at the allegations, Neil Gaiman saw all those interactions as consensual, or like in like a not that I'm justifying it obviously, but like in a toxic guy way, that it was like okay for him, right? So in his mind, coercion is like acceptable thing for him to do, whereas in his books he's depicting something that he believes is unacceptable. So in his mind, these events are different,
Right. Yeah, I think if it was like really obvious, where it's like basically he did this thing, he knew it was wrong, and then he wrote about it in a book, then it'd be like, yo, man, what the hell? But like, I mean, if it's a different situation, which is what I'm kind of seeing that it is, odds are the situations in the books are stuff that he pulled out from his brain, and then the actual allegation stuff that happened completely divided from that, which in that case, I don't think it can be really compared to like revenge porn because it's fictional at that point.
Would you agree with me at the very least that like before, it's probably a reasonable assumption to make that like that experiences that are described within like works of fiction often connect to the author's real life? Maybe not always, but often, right? Frequently. We would all agree with that. That's usually the case, right? So Stephen King, for instance, like he like a lot of his stories are set in Maine, for instance. That's because like he lives in Maine, like in the Northeast. It's middle working class people because that's his background.
I would be careful about assumptions like that. I think there's a lot that people will just take from, like, you can be influenced by media. You can be depicting like scenes like this because you've seen depictions like this in media. Say I watch Game of Thrones and that has a lot of like the sexual violence scenes, and I'm like, oh, I thought it was handled effectively in Game of Thrones, so I'm gonna transpose that into my book, right?
Yeah, like I write, and I've written things that had some like that type of material, graphic material in it, and it wasn't based off of any type of real life thing that happened to me, or that I was at all involved in. That would never happen, or that I like heard about from somewhere else, because I mean, like, things can be just completely divided from a personal experience, even like that. You know what I'm saying?
I don't think
let me put.
Oh, I was gonna say, you don't usually get like one-to-ones like the Cosby Show episode with the barbecue sauce, where everybody starts feeling amorous and leaving because of his barbecue sauce, or like the straight up misery kind of connection with Stephen King and cocaine and other problems like that. Usually, it's just the idea like, hey, this person is into this sort of thing, and now this is what we're getting. I don't know if it's very easy to. Go
I
ahead.
have a point about that, but I'm gonna let Queen go because
Yeah,
she
Queen
hasn't.
wants to speak.
Yeah, y'all. So are we talking specifically about Neil? I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Is it
Gaiman.
Gaiman or Gaiman? Okay,
Either
just didn't
one.
want to like.
We're pretty
Right.
much on the whole broad stream of like any media where the author has done some things that we know about. And if you see something similar within that work or something that even reminds you of what this individual does, is it something we might want to separate ourselves from? And can we continue to consume that media?
Yeah, I think specifically if we're just talking about Neil, I don't feel like the allegations that were held against him were specifically in his books, whatever, because they were much older at times. So after he had written his books and such, right? I feel like any other author too, if it comes out that there's some allegations against them that were specifically in their books, I feel like that's a very specific thing. Like, oh my goodness, like this person actually wrote about some of the things that they experienced. That's not like a
Oh, Queen, you got music
audio
coming
and like
through.
an sorry. I'm like trying to play my music in the background. Does that pause? Does that help?
I think you're good.
Yeah, we don't hear
Okay.
anymore.
Okay, sorry. I'm like trying to play it. It's fucked up. Anyway, sorry. So I feel like if it's not in an autobiography, right? Like this happened to me, or I did this, or like there was some gray areas, and then it comes out like, oh, those gray areas, like, oh, this is exactly what happened to like this person, right? But like I feel like if it's something that's like afterwards and it wasn't written in books, then I feel like we can look at these authors' misgivings, I should say, like, and then be like, oh, like we can still appreciate their art because it wasn't necessarily in their works or anything. But we can, I know everyone's like, separate the art from the author or the person, right? Now, that can't go for everyone, right? But specifically Neil Gaiman, I feel like we can give him like a pass, and I'm sorry that like all of his shit like went to hell that he was working on. But like, geez Louise, like I like listened to a bunch of shit that like happened, and like I went into a deep dive on like what like the people like said, and then like yeah, like it was a fucking deep ass dive like on Neil. And like I just don't think that like the authors, I guess like I don't know, like
Personal
people
life?
who accused him, no, the people who accused him weren't very credible, considering the fact that like where like this turtle news like came out against them, right? It wasn't like a mainstream news like this is like coming from like New York Times, this is coming from like the LA Times, like it wasn't coming from like any of these like media sources. So it's like if these people went to these media sources and other people weren't biting, I feel like there's something there where like there's something that wasn't there.
Okay. Before we get into that, because I know we will, I just have a response to what Lethe said. Is that I think that the Cosby Show's example is way different because I think that that is more comparable to what actually happened. You know, in the episode, he drugged people against their consent to make them fall asleep, and in that episode, it was displayed as something that is totally acceptable, right? Which kind of goes to show what his attitude towards that thing in real life might be. Okay, and then in terms of the allegations, I am I I am not saying one way or another because these are just allegations, and I don't usually tend to say like, oh, this person's guilty because they're allegations. It's mostly just people coming forward with stories. That being said, I don't think that I also don't think we should discredit them because of the sources or the news channels that they chose. I mean, it was seen as enough of a strong enough allegation that Neil Gaiman stepped down, and the people producing these shows decided to end them. And we really don't know why they didn't go to these other news sources, or what these news sources said, or what these news sources, like, what their reasons for not publishing these things were. You know?
I mean, Neil Gaiman is not the only popular author to whom this has happened. Do you guys know Junot Diaz? Junot.
What did it do?
He's an author. He's a very famous author. He's I don't remember if he's from Puerto Rico or if he's from Cuba, but he's I'm not sure if he's Puerto Rican or if he's Cuban American. But he is, and he's like well known. Like he's won major like literary prizes. But he was accused, I believe, of sexual harassment. I believe he sexually harassed multiple women. And what was difficult was that like he responded to this by talking about being a victim of sexual assault himself, about how he was sexually abused when he was a very young boy. And sexual abuse of himself is a theme like within like some of his short stories. So like one of his like famous short stories, Yisrael, like it's about a boy who's molested on a bus. And then he leaves the bus and cries with his brother. And then they beat up and abuse this poor boy who's facially disfigured. And it's metaphorical. That's very weird. But all of this to say, right, this has happened before. And when it's happened before, there really didn't seem to be any consequences.
Video contains
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was trying to share something.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, like, do you guys think that like it was like acceptable for the trans community to boycott like the new Harry Potter video game?
Anybody can boycott whatever they want.
Well, I know that they can, but do you think that it was the moral decision for them to do so? You think that it was they were obligated, morally driven to do? It was the good choice, the good thing to do.
I would say probably, yeah.
Yeah, probably, but I mean, if somebody chooses not to, is within that community. I mean, that's up to them.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with that.
And that's
I would say it's
also
probably
part of what I really wonder about, because I remember there was a big reaction when people were talking about boycotting the Harry Potter series, and people would actually attack each other, like friends were attacking each other over supporting this media. And it's like, hey, I just want to play a good game. But then the people that were upset by this media being out there and their friends consuming it felt betrayed.
I think that that's pretty silly. Like, I think that it's a personal choice if you want to boycott something. If you don't, I mean, you know, somebody can make a suggestion. A friend can make a suggestion and say, hey, man, you know, do you know about this, this, and this? And try to inform you. But if the person knows and still makes a choice to not boycott or to react in a certain way, then, I mean, that's on them. They can do what they want.
Yeah, I would say it's more of a, like, if we decide that someone is morally objectionable and we want them to be we want to remove them from power and influence, then boycotting their material is a moral, like, it's a moral virtue, but not a moral obligation.
Yeah.
Kind of yes, but kind of no. So here's what I'll say. Like I've talked about, like, I've given this like with like what we've talked about, argued about porn, like in like different like panels as well. I think it's fair to say that like almost all consumption that we do in some way is connected to it being evil, right? Like if you get in your car, you know, you click the key in the engine, you know, well, you're polluting the environment. You're making it worse that way, right? And then, you know, you're doing, like, think of all the like the mundane things that we do every single day that like is actually objectively worse. Like, but nonetheless, right? Even though it's true that like you can't completely cut out every single evil piece of consumption out of your life, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, right? That doesn't mean that it isn't like, and if you can do it, right? If you have the resources to be able to choose to make the best ethical choices that you can with the consumption that you do, I think that you are obligated to doing it, right? Like, I think there's a difference between getting mad, like, I don't know, like a single mom who makes $40K a year, who has like 3 kids, for going to Walmart to buy shoes, that were made like in a Chinese, factory, to then bring, I'm not mad at that family, right? Because that family, they're just trying to like get shoes for their kids to support their families, right? But that's entirely different, right? As compared to the billionaire, for instance, who walks into Walmart. Because I know that billionaire does not have to go to Walmart. That billionaire could make a choice to like have ethically sourced shoes, and they're making the active choice not to, right? So, and I think that the same thing applies to like when we're thinking about like boycotting like video games or boycotting art, right? The frank answer is that like for some people that is going to be more of a luxury than others, right? I could see it being the case, that somebody doesn't have a lot of hobbies or joys in life. This is their last few dollars. They just want to play it. I could see there might be some exceptions for this, but generally, right, if you have the resources to choose, and if you can choose something else that is in line with your values, I don't think that you should boycott the Hogwarts Legacy game or whatever, just to be clear. I'm just saying, within your worldview, if you think it is a good thing to do, then you should do that thing. Yeah, it is your duty to do that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people should be strongly encouraged, but if they choose not to, I think that like there should be a limit on kind of social shaming on stuff like that. I think a lot of people take it a bit too far on stuff like Hogwarts Legacy and with, some other boycotts where it's like, I really think that while it's, it might be considered important, but if somebody's informed and they have people who go, hey, you really should listen, here's why, and they still don't, I mean, what can you do at that point? And then the ball's in your court. I mean, if you don't want to talk to that person as much because they didn't boycott or didn't want to, or want to reevaluate things, then I mean, that's your jam. I think that's a bit far for me personally, unless it was something really extreme, then might change my mind. It depends on the issue, but
So what
other than
about
that, I'm
when
pretty.
Yeah,
boycotting something highlights it to the point where it now becomes popular and does better than it would have?
Oh, so like the Streisand effect, yeah.
Well, then that's just bad strategy. That's just bad strategy. If you attempt to like remove something from popularity and it backfires on you, well, then you just have bad strategy. Your plan wasn't good. Not that you did the wrong thing or that you were morally wrong. It's just that you didn't go about it in the most effective way. And I feel like that's kind of a different thing.
I
Well,
feel like that's not like a thing. Like that's a very rare thing. Like I don't think that's very popular where it's like, oh, well, we're going to boycott this thing and then it doesn't like work. Right?
Well, Leafy, I mean, I'll give you an example, right? So imagine, right, like in this, I think that like people have made this argument to vegans, right? You could imagine you go to a vegan and you say, listen, if you stop eating meat, if you boycott meat entirely, I know that you're intending to stop, the slaughter and torture of animals. But if you stop eating meat entirely, the inevitable consequence will be that there will be tons of cattle and no reason to keep them alive, and they will all be genocided and wiped off the face of the planet. And so if you want these cows to live, and if you want these cows to continue to exist, you should go and you should buy beef, and you should support ethical beef, right? But what would the vegan say? The vegan would say, right, listen, okay, it doesn't matter like what the consequence is. The principle that I have is it's wrong to consume the flesh of living creatures. That's the principle. It doesn't matter, right? Like if it ends, the entire lifespan, like all of the cattle, I can fight for that cause, in other ways. But like, I'm not going, to like start eating human flesh, right? Just because, I find out that it might cease, the slaughter and torture of people somewhere, right? Like, no, the answer is that you have to send in the army to save them. Not that, you see where I'm going with this, right? Like, the point is, I don't think that saying that like it would increase like the likelihood of it happening. I don't think that that's sufficient. I think you have to address the principle of the issue, the principle of like why it's wrong.
Right. Like here in Denver, we just recently had, well, obviously everyone had the election, right? And there were two things on the ballot. One, to get rid of like cattle here in Denver, to like stop slaughtering them and like ban slaughtering here. And then the second one was to stop fur trade essentially here. Like you wouldn't be able to like display fur or like do like leather work or do any of that, right? Both of those failed like by huge margins, right? Like, I mean, like I voted for one and then didn't vote for the other. I was like, okay, stopping slaughtering. All right, cool. Like I definitely like voted for that, right? So that way that's not here in Colorado, in Denver specifically, right? But the other one to like do fur trade and stuff, I was like, that's part of like the culture here in Denver, is the fur trade, is the leather trade, right? You know, those big old fur hats with like, you know, the like raccoon hats, like that is stuff is like all like known here in Denver, right? Like that is a thing, right? But like, yeah, like if you're going to do something ethical, like there was a reason why, like they wanted to ethically stop all of this, right? But all of Denverites were like, nah, like this is the like culture of Denver. You're not going to stop the culture just because like you want to be ethical, right? I get it, but like that's it, you know?
Right. Yeah, about the specific Denver ones, I remember because one of my friends who lives in Denver actually, they were having me go over the ballot with them because they were like, hey, you know, which way should I vote on this? And I remember hearing that like the slaughterhouse thing only applied to like one slaughterhouse. So that's probably why people were like, it's singling stuff out. And I mean, like on the fur thing, like I totally, like, I feel like that's a good example of why a lot of things that people may look at as like morally wrong or morally right, they might be looking at it kind of to the immediate instead of to the later effects. Like, for example, with like fur and leather and stuff like that, people who are like, especially like environmental activists and people who are animal rights activists will be like, okay, that stuff has got to go. You know, the fur trade, leather, stuff like that. But generally, when you look further into it, like for this is just an example, these are usually meat byproducts. Like the cowhides for leather are usually from cows that are already being slaughtered for meat, and leather products last a lot longer than their like non-leather counterparts that are usually made of plastic and other non-renewable, non-biodegradable materials. So it's like I'd say an example of how a lot of people think they think they're doing the right thing, but they kind of don't look ahead as much.
Yeah, I mean, I had a leather jacket at a very young age, like, and it was great. It was warm, like it was a gift, right? From like, you know, my mom's boyfriend at the time, and it was nice. Like it kept me warm, like I didn't have to worry about it, you know, but like, yeah, like I totally get it. Like it definitely does like age as long as you keep it like looking good, or even like leather boots, right? Like it's going to like keep its age as long as you keep it up, right? But like, yeah, I totally get why people don't want to like ethically do something, right? Like ethically you don't want to play a game, ethically you don't want to like eat like meats and like things of that sort. But it should be 100% your choice to do so. And I mean, if your friend is like, I don't want to like play this game, it's like, all right, cool. Like I support your like choice, but it's like, if you like, if you're that person's friend, you definitely wouldn't like play that game, right? Like that makes perfect sense. But it's like, if you know that your neighbor is playing it, but you're not really friends with your neighbor, you're like, fuck that neighbor. Like they're doing some shit I don't like, right? That's some shit I don't like. But sorry if anyone doesn't know that song. Yeah, like it should be your choice to decide whether or not you want to ethically do something. If you want to ethically read a book just because this person is doing something. Someone mentioned R. Kelly in the chat earlier. It's like, wouldn't listen to R. Kelly now, right? Because you can't really get it unless you got the CD, right? Unless you downloaded that like song from like forever ago. But like there are a lot of R. Kelly fans who are like, he didn't do it. Like he's fine. Like, you know. But there are a lot of people like, yeah, obviously he did it. Why the fuck would I support him? Like, why the fuck would I give him my coin listening to him? And like I said, unless you got his fucking CD, that's a whole different thing. But like, yeah, like it's your choice. It's your 100% your choice.
Welcome, Ginger.
Hi.
I think I was also leading into some of the R. Kelly stuff because like there are some songs, like the first songs I heard from him, just hearing them as a kid, I was like, these sound kind of sus. I don't know why they sound sus, but they sound sus. And then way down the line, I'm like, yeah, this was definitely sus. It's always been sus. And then I go to a family barbecue just this year, and they're playing R. Kelly. I want to leave the barbecue.
Yikes.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah,
it's the recognition to the niche, and you're like, I know the songs, but I got to go. I gotta go.
Glad you made it, Ginger.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes to. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, no. I apologize for being late. I misunderstood the time.
All good. Glad you
I
made
did
it.
early too. I forgot what time zones were, but at least I
Yeah.
was really early.
It's been a
No,
while since
I've done that
streamed,
too.
sorry.
Yeah.
Dang Pacific people. Gosh darn it.
The weather's really
Yeah, well-
nice.
Oh.
I mean,
Why can't you all be in Texas? Jesus Christ.
No, I mean I'm the one who's
Yeah,
trying to
let me go
move
to
to
the bathroom real quick.
California.
I think
I
we
don't
should
wanna
wall
be
off
here.
Texas. I mean, that's just an opinion I have, but you know, if we're gonna build a wall, that's exactly where we should build it.
Technically, I don't want to be here either, but I'm here, all right, and I'm making it work. So, all right.
So we're still on the death of the author for at least another 10 minutes, and then we'll switch over to the next topic. But I'd like to get your opinion on it. Like, at what point should we say, hey, you know, let's just not support this media. Let's not view this media. This person doesn't need any, doesn't deserve any spotlight.
Well, God, it's such a slippery slope because it's unfortunate that you can't decide who is a good artist and who isn't. And it seems to be that the majority of people out there now, there's constantly stuff coming out about everybody now. And it's like, where do we draw the line? And unfortunately, I actually don't know where we draw the line because, I mean, we saw this with J.K. Rowling, you know, she created this entire fucking world, and then because she is, for lack of a better term, the C word, like we can't enjoy the Harry Potter world, which is just insane to me. Like I grew up with that, and now all of a sudden, like if you're watching it or being a part of it, you can be considered transphobic as well. And it's like, well, where does that end? Because how do we stop our children from wanting to see something that they don't understand? I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but kids don't know the difference between what the author's doing and what they're reading.
I mean, Harry Potter is a very big thing. Like, there are a lot of people like yourself who was like, hold on to it, right? Because, like, they love it. There is something that they found in it and they connected with, right? And, like, there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, like, she is a C word, you know, ayo.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, yeah, like, she is definitely not the person you thought that she was, right? Writing those books, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's just like if you really want to read Harry Potter and to hold on to it, and you know that that's not the person you really want to like associate because you really do like have those feelings, you know that you believe that this is wrong, like within your heart, right? But it is a very hard thing to differentiate yourself from this thing that like really held you down for all these years, and something you connected with this author who is like doing all those things, and you're like
Right.
I don't know how people do it, right? Like
Yeah.
art's
Some
only
people
something easy, right?
Well,
But
yeah,
like,
sometimes
but
it's
like,
easy, like with like The Flash, you just like that's easy enough. I don't watch the movie. The
right,
guy's a fucking psychopath. Like, why would I put
exactly.
money into that movie? But like with things that have been around since like our childhood and that have like I said, such a creative world and such like a unique outlook on things, but then to be like, oh well, the person who made it is this horrible human being, so I have to stop with the entire world. It's crazy. That's a lot.
I guess, but at that point, don't you think
Wait,
that
can
you're
I?
kind of just judging between media versus like what's worth it to overlook versus what's not, which is kind of, I feel like, more of a personal choice?
Well, yeah, I
Thanks.
mean that's a personal choice for all of us,
Yeah,
isn't it?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, can I? I have something. I have a quick question. So, would you agree that there are things in the Harry Potter books that reflect J.K. Rowling's negative personality traits or like her bad stuff, right?
I mean,
Specifically, like the slavery stuff.
well, no, because I feel like that could have been taken anywhere. I mean, when I was a kid, I likened it to concentration camps where it was a real world issue that she put into a fake world.
Yeah, but wasn't it the case in Harry Potter that they said that the slavery was okay and justifiable, and that they shouldn't remove these elves from slavery because they actually like being like in service?
Yeah, but then you have Hermione the entire time fighting against that.
But she was criticized by the narrative, wasn't she?
No, actually, she wasn't. She was considered
Oh,
brave and unique for it.
I mean, okay, I'll look into that. I've heard different things about how that situation was handled.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely not. Although she was ridiculed by the students, there, everybody. So the people that join, there's this spew community. Okay, I don't know, we're getting off topic, but there's a spew community, which is to support the house elf enslavement, um, to free them from slavery. What she was doing, was it wasn't ridiculed. I'm sorry, I'm just confused. Have you read the books?
Big Harry Potter fan over here.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything because I've never read the books nor watched the movies, so.
I only
No,
got to
I'm
page
no,
87 in the first book.
I mean, yeah, I could be wrong. This is just what I've heard from the books. Maybe there's a completely different narrative around them. Because I've heard pretty explicit things that the elves said outright they don't want to be removed from slavery, right?
They
Did that
don't.
not happen?
But isn't Stockholm syndrome a
Oh,
thing that happens to people that are enslaved? Isn't that something that actually
uh,
happens to people? There were plenty of slaves that didn't know what to do after they were done. Like, I'm not saying that it's a good thing, but you have to see every side to be able to see that there's a good and bad. So like she has to portray a certain side so that you can see the other side of it. Do you know what I mean? Like that's how authors work.
that could be the case. Yeah, I'll definitely look and see if that's how it's portrayed.
So yeah, none of the house elves. I mean, it's a completely different thing. First, like they're just.
Something else too, I'll mention as well. Have you guys ever seen Downton Abbey?
Mhm.
Okay, well, do you remember Tom, the driver, the chauffeur? He was a socialist, and he talked about like being a socialist, and he talked about workers' rights. And
Yeah.
later on, like after Sylvia died in childbirth, he even wanted to marry a woman, who was a big socialist who talked about workers' rights. And there were strikes, like, do we remember this character? Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so if you'll remember, like in the context of this, right, is that he is working for, Lord Downton, of Downton Abbey. And the whole story of Downton Abbey is like the old world of like the Gilded Age of the early 20th century, moving into like the 1920s and then, like into the First World War. That's sort of the story. It's moving away from the Edwardian period, a period where there really were lords and ladies with actual servants, with a servant class, and moving, more away from that into like, what like the aristocracy has become today. And I say this, right, because I know that as Americans, like our relationship, like I know the first thing that we think of, like when we see, a big castle, a servant class, that is bound in service and never wants to leave, I understand why our perception of that, when we would immediately go to slavery, in the South, because that's what that looked like, in the United States. But that's not necessarily true for the United Kingdom, right? For the United Kingdom in Britain, it actually was true that there was a servant class, that competed and liked working, for the lords and the dukes and the duchesses. If you'll remember, like was Mr. Carson, he's the butler, he doesn't want anything to change. He doesn't want, the telephone. He doesn't want to fire, the underfootman or the under butler or the valet, right? It's viewed as an honor, as a privilege. Like, do you remember there was that one scene? It was Matthew, right? He said, "What do I need a valet for, right? I can dress myself every day." And like, what was Mr. Mosley's response to that? Mr. Mosley's response was not to feel liberated, right? Because now I can go out, and be a carpenter. Yeah, it wasn't even just the job. It was, they viewed this type of work as their vocation. It was, this is what my father was trained to do. He was the Lord's butler, and before him, his father was. So it feels, it's not the same relationship, I don't think.
Yeah.
So
I guess it depends on what she was trying to talk about in, like, I don't know, like obviously that type of like servant class stuff, that Victorian Edwardian period was way different than chattel slavery. It's a different type and a different degree of exploitation and a different degree and different type of harm. I think that both can be portrayed in media in obviously different ways or in similar ways, but obviously I feel like when we're comparing it to J.K. Rowling, I'm just curious as to the elf thing. I'm not personally familiar, as I said. Is it more similar to like what you were talking about Downton Abbey, or was it more similar to like chattel slavery? Like, what's going on? Because if they were depicting chattel slavery as like
they weren't
they like
depicting
it,
chattel
then
slavery. So they did they it was groomed into them that this was something that they were supposed to be doing. But it's not like they didn't have their own powers. They were more powerful than wizards in certain ways. They didn't need wands to conduct magic. They didn't need any of that. They chose not to use magic against humans. That's what they decided against. They would not use magic against humans unless absolutely necessary. So it's not the same thing. There's nothing. They weren't weak. They weren't beaten down to the point of like, oh God, you're gonna die if you don't do this. They could leave anytime they wanted to. They just didn't.
right. Obviously, that's still like a type of exploitation, but there's nothing wrong with depicting exploitation or depicting negativity in fictional works, in like depictions of nonfiction. That's perfectly fine with me. Yeah, I guess I just would only really care if it was depicted like, or it was supposed to represent something in real life, but it was depicted super wrong.
Oh yeah,
But
no. Like
yeah.
there was no full represent like this is supposed to mean this and this is supposed to mean this. I mean, there's classism that happens in the world, and when she's trying to explain what classism is, you're explaining it like they're not even, so they're getting it, oh well, they're not human, so they shouldn't be treated that way, like type situation. So there's a lot more to it than just like, oh, they were enslaved and it was supposed to, like, it's just, I'm sorry, just
yeah, my guess is that it's probably like it's closer to like what I think like Downton Abbey. I think that's probably like the actual relationship that was being depicted, and like it. And like the title slave is there, but I think that's also to sort of depict how evil and cruel the Malfoys were also, just to be, or the purebloods, right?
The purebloods, like that's what the point of them was, just to show how they can see anybody and be like, well, you're not, you have this, so you're not human. You don't have this mentality, so you're not human. So you would see like that's how they would treat their pet if they had one, like type situation where it's just not. They don't really have pets. They have familiars. So it's like they don't treat their familiars like that. They treat their familiars like family, so they had to have some sort of like ability to show how bad the classism can get.
Right. So I'm gonna draw this back to the original topic. I kind of